This picture really stands out because I remember I was about 23 when I had Jamie, and I was very young, and I was taking a copious amount of, classes at college. So I was just, I think I was in school like all day, and the kids were in daycare. So I think I probably would have noticed things earlier had I had been with them more often, but they were like in daycare from like 7 to 5 every day. But I do recall, and of course back then too, you have to remember this is he was born in 1989. Okay, back then no one ever talked about autism, and if they did, it certainly wasn't made very public. And there was really nothing out that I had ever heard. Of course, my major, was Spanish, so, it's not like I was, coming across autism very often. We were living in San Francisco at the time, and I remember taking this and thinking, what an interesting expression, because this was kind of the expression. As you could see, my daughter, she's looking at me and she's making there's expression. Jamie, it appears there, yeah, he's looking, but he was doing the same look at me there as he would the same look with the arms out like that. And he would be kicking his legs and flapping his hands every time he saw the mobile. That's what I first noticed, is sort of a faraway look. Later is when I started noticing things like, this kind of, look at his behavior there. It's like a distressed look. He did not want to be held. He did not want to be cuddled. He's got his feet going like this. He didn't want to be hugged or cuddled. And that has since changed too, which is really interesting. Now he does accept some hugging and cuddles. But that was the first signs that I saw, is this kind of stuff. I also remember this. I remember taking this picture, and again, he was totally in his own world there. He was fascinated with the bubbles and the water. Just very common. I remember him liking the patterns, staring at that. And I would talk to him. I'd be like, hey, are you enjoying your bath? Wouldn't even look at me. Wouldn't even acknowledge anybody if they were talking to him. He made absolutely no social connection or communication interaction whatsoever. Now here again, there's a sister and him, and he's looking at the camera. But I remember right after that, he had gotten mad and started slapping his legs because he thought that the camera that I was holding was his tippy cup. And he was angry, and he wanted it. And that's a chew thing that we had there. Now here, this is obvious. These were some air splints that we had to have medically prescribed, because he, at this point, had now started engaging in extreme self-abuse, if you can hardly believe it. I mean, he's 21 now. I mean, this is how long we've been dealing with this, and dealing with professionals and doctors and behavioral specialists, and he's still hitting himself. This is just one of probably, 50, 60 things that we've tried over the years. And basically these splints, they don't solve the problem. They didn't solve it then, they wouldn't solve it now. I mean, it's just a Band-Aid. There he is trying to hit himself, and they're stopping him, but, he's obviously upset. Those are more obvious signs of autism when you see the self-injurious behavior. And according to research, and every research is different, but a lot of research papers are pretty solid on saying that 5 to 30% of autistic population engages in self-injurious behavior. Other research says different, higher or lower, but that's generally the range. My other son at the time, they're all looking, and he's just off in his own world. Then again, you see him over here, and he's looking at me. But again, every time he looks at the camera, is that something to eat, or is that something that, somebody has for me? Here's some, what you would call, aloofness, not really aloofness, but sensory and just kind of hanging out in his own world. This is him in a tube that was swinging in a school play. That's the only way they could get him to even be part of it. And he just sat there the whole time swinging. Thankfully, he wasn't swinging his fists into his head. Now here he loved this couch because he loved the stripes on it, so he would often sit on that, and I think he loved the feel as well. Another sign, just again, that faraway look. And then, of course, there's the head punching. Okay, I remember this picture. I remember it well because I remember he didn't interact whatsoever with the other little boy in the wagon, and I still hadn't really known what was going on with him. He was diagnosed with autism when he was 13 months, and it was by a pediatrician and a neurologist. Here's a sign. You start seeing things like this, the hands, the odd positioning. Here's another indication. Look at the hands and the odd positioning. Again, you see the hands. There's the hands. And there's the hands. One thing that stands out in my mind, a moment, is October 17th, 1989, when I was living in San Francisco. I was just so into my academics. The fact that Jamie never cried when I dropped him at daycare or raised his arms when he saw me escaped my attention. I don't know if it was denial or distraction that inhibited me. It might have been both. But it certainly ended on February 1990 when a daycare director waved me down in the courtyard and says, hey, we need to talk. And so I'm looking at her and I'm thinking, okay, what, And she's telling me, she's like, I need to talk to you about your son. And I said, well, mind you, I'm 23, I don't know what the heck's going on. Most 23-year-olds, you're just, absorbed in your own life. And so I looked at her and I'm like, okay, what's up? And she says, I think you should have your son looked at, and he doesn't seem to be developing right. And so I remember, kind of taking it in, saying thanks, I'll bring him to the doctors and ask his pediatrician. Now, mind you, we've had already been to a pediatrician several times. Nobody had really said anything. They just kept telling me, everything was fine. No one even mentioned it. So it's funny that a daycare director had to illuminate it. So I remember walking past Jamie's preschool room and hearing Tchaikovsky's Dance of the Swans. And I remember peeking inside the window and seeing several toddlers flapping around, their arms to the flute beat. And then I'm scanning the room and I'm thinking, where's Jamie? And I see him and he's sitting alone on a vinyl mat. And he's just by himself. And I see another little girl his age. She comes over and she's probably about 11 months old, like he was at the time, and gives him some plastic keys, and he just sticks his fingers in his mouth and stares right through her. So then I begin, looking around, and I'm comparing him to the other 11, 12-month-olds in the class, and I'm noticing, as if the light is finally going on, I'm thinking, they're crawling. He's never crawled. They're sitting. He sat, but he never crawled. He actually just went from a sitting position and got up one day and started walking. And he wasn't interacting with any children. He totally ignored them. He didn't point to any food. He only cried when he saw food. And I noticed he wasn't following voices. He acted as if telling the doctor, well, he won't hold a cookie. He holds his bottle lopsided. I was still nursing him off and on, but because of the daycare issues, it was getting harder. So he had a bottle, which he did hold, but he would hold it lopsided all the time. But he would hold it. The doctor, asking Jamie, do you hear me? And trying to get him to, look at him. And Jamie's eyes would just trace the red and green stripes on the doctor's shirt and land on his pocket pen. I mean, there really wasn't anything that he was interested in interacting with the doctor at all, other than staring at the pattern on his shirt and the pen in his pocket. Now, I remember the neurologist too, and he was a really nice man. I remember he was very encouraging. I remember he did the typical things. He tapped Jamie's leg with a rubbery mallet. He did some kind of Babinski test. I remember him telling me, your son appears to live in a world of his own. And I remember him telling me that the prognosis and treatment of autism was not very good, but I should go ahead and have other children and probably think about institutional care. And of course, as soon as he said that, he might as well have been speaking Gaelic, because after I heard institutional care, I went deaf. Okay, here's fascination with water, the sensory input that we were talking about. And you can tell that. That's a real clear, visible sign. Here is sitting here staring at the shadows and the lights. Now I have a video of this, and this picture where he's trying to get into the fountain at the hospital. And again, I think he's like 11 or 12 in this picture. This shows you the dangers of what can happen if you're not closely monitoring a person with severe autism who is unable to differentiate between some kind of a danger. As you can see, the man back there is probably thinking, what is going on here? Jamie, it didn't matter if it was a fountain. He did not care. He simply saw water, likes water, and wanted to go in the water. To him, there was no way to, he's not processing that this is not a socially appropriate thing to do, is to climb in the fountain and start, sitting in it and kicking your legs around and flapping your hands. So in a sense, it's cute. It's not something horrific, but it's also something that is a telltale sign of autism. I mean, there's no sense of danger here. There's no sense of social inappropriateness of doing this. To him, it's perfectly normal. I see water, it's in a fountain, and I'm gonna hook my leg over and I'm gonna hop in. At his age, when you're 10 or 11 in this picture, yeah, that's definitely a sign of autism. Of course, there's people that are resisting being held and hugged again. Okay, but then you see him here, and here's his brother. We always try to teach his brothers to always partake, just like we teach his niece, to partake and to help and to be kind and tolerant and loving of Jamie. And there's his other brother feeding him. That was my sister feeding him. And here's signs again of the aloofness and in his own world. He's staring at the trees. He's probably about 8 or 9 there. Here he is again. It's Christmas, and he's looking at the ceiling fan as we're opening up Christmas presents. And as we're opening up Christmas presents, he was staring at I believe it was Christmas wrapping that was colorful in front of him. Okay, now before, remember, he's resisting the hugging. But then over the years, you start to see more of he's liking the affection, receiving the affection. And a lot of that was just because we pushed it, and we always hugged him, we always touched him, we always tickled him, we always, always laughed with him. We still do. And I think that's a huge part. We just always had, I have him on my lap on the couch with my other son. We just always make sure he's feeling the touch. And I think one of the biggest problems, and what the worst thing that a person can do, is be thrown off by an autistic person who is, who you think does not want to be touched, but perhaps really needs to be touched. Now again, that's highly individualized. I'm just telling you what our experience is. But these